February 1945. Snow drifted across the shattered remains of a German field hospital outside Cologne. The wind whispered through broken windows, carrying the distant thud of artillery from the Western Front. Inside, beneath the dim glow of a lantern, a young German nurse named Liesel tended to a man who should have been her enemy, an American pilot, shot down days earlier. His uniform was torn, his face pale from blood loss. She pressed a wet cloth to his forehead and whispered a quiet prayer, not for Germany's victory, but for the silence of pain. Outside, the Third Reich was collapsing. The once proud nation that promised order and destiny now drowned in rubble and starvation. Liesel had believed once in the strength of that promise. She had believed in her Führer, in duty, in sacrifice. But as she looked at the wounded soldier, the man whose accent she barely understood, she began to see something that her country's war machine could no longer supply: humanity. The American's name was James. He was a sergeant, captured after his plane went down near Aachen. The Germans brought him to the hospital not out of mercy, but for interrogation once he healed. Yet, under Liesel's care, his life clung to a fragile balance, sustained by rations meant for her own meals. Each spoonful of watery soup she slipped between his cracked lips became a quiet rebellion. The symbol of that rebellion was bread. It was scarce now, black, coarse, rationed in ounces. Once it had been the pride of German households, the heart of every meal. Now it represented something deeper, what one shared when the world collapsed. Liesel's stolen pieces of bread, saved from her own ration, became an act of defiance against the emptiness war demanded of her soul. She had seen too much already. Burned villages, children carried in her arms who would never wake again. The steady march of men who no longer sang their war songs. And then, this American, fragile, vulnerable, thanking her with eyes instead of words. In him, she saw not the enemy, but the mirror of all she had lost. The official records from the final months of the war tell us of chaos in Germany's hospitals. By early 1945, the German Red Cross reported over 70% shortages in medical supplies. Morphine was replaced with alcohol. Clean bandages were torn from curtains. In those places of suffering, human boundaries often blurred. Eyewitness reports from Allied POWs describe the paradox of mercy. Untold, German nurses who smuggled extra blankets or slipped them bits of sugar when guards looked away. One American pilot later wrote in his post-war memoir, "I learned that kindness has no uniform. It can bloom even in the coldest enemy land." It was the same realization dawning in Liesel's heart. But compassion came with risk. The Gestapo had begun executing medical staff for aiding the enemy. Liesel knew that even a gesture, a bandaged wound, an offered word, could be considered treason. Yet the more she tried to suppress her growing affection, the more it haunted her. Each night, she listened to the distant sound of Allied bombers, knowing that one of them might have been his squadron returning. And each morning, she prayed they would not fall where she could see. When the Americans finally broke through the Rhine, the hospital descended into panic. Orders arrived to evacuate and leave the prisoners behind. Liesel refused. She hid James beneath the floorboards of the storage room, where the scent of disinfectant mixed with fear. For 3 days, she kept him alive with crumbs of bread and water drawn from melted snow. It was during those silent days that war, that grand machinery of flags and orders, ceased to exist between them. Only 2 people remained, holding on to a fragile thread of life. In the records of the U.S. Army Medical Corps after the war, a statement appears, describing a recovered airman who credited a German nurse with saving my life when the SS wanted me dead. No name is given, no photograph survives, but perhaps it was her. When the Americans finally liberated the area, the hospital stood abandoned. Liesel was found tending the wounded, German and Allied alike. Witnesses remembered her walking barefoot through snow, carrying medical instruments, her white apron stained with soot and blood. She never fled, never surrendered. After the war, many German nurses were interrogated for their wartime conduct. Some were praised, others imprisoned. Liesel's name, lost among thousands, may have faded from the archives. But her act, saving a man whom propaganda called a monster, became a quiet testimony to something greater than any victory. In the ruins of Europe, the bread returned. American trucks rolled through, bringing loaves soft and white, unlike anything most Germans had seen in years. For those who tasted it, it became more than food. It was a symbol of survival, of abundance, of a world that could rebuild. Perhaps Liesel tasted it too. Perhaps she remembered the pieces she once hid in her apron to keep one man alive. The war ended, but the memory of mercy did not. Some historians might call it love, the kind that blooms not from romance, but from shared humanity. A love born from the ashes of ideology, where compassion was the only rebellion left. Bread, the simplest of all things, became the link between enemies. In its breaking, there was forgiveness. In its sharing, a promise that not all hearts had turned to stone. In the end, history records the numbers, battles, divisions, casualties, but not the quiet moments when one life saved another. That is the truest legacy of that winter. That in a world built on hate, one German nurse chose compassion, and perhaps, somewhere, far away, that American pilot remembered her every time he broke a loaf open. The sound of crust splitting like the echo of peace after gunfire. Because in war, it is never the victors who define humanity. It is those who dared to keep it alive,